in the note, that it, just to confirm, that is the start of the green line. Yep. Okay. And then points 3 and 4 on that, that's around 45, 46 seconds into the animation.
What was that? What was the question?
Points 3 and 4.
Yeah.
As I understand it. Okay. And then into Dr. Mealy's appendix, pages 15 and 16. I know the title on the top has been corrected. What does that do to the titles at the bottom of each of those pages?
Well, to the extent that they're inconsistent, ma'am, I suspect the answer is they would need to be corrected as well. If we haven't picked that up, I apologise, ma'am, but you're obviously right.
I just need to know what I'm calling them at the bottom on the titles.
Yeah, let me just confer with Dr. Mealy, who happily is here today, and I'll come back to you about that.
Okay.
The footers to 15 and 16, basically. Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, that's what I want to know. Okay, thank you.
I'll deal with that right now, ma'am. They must change in the same way.
Okay, so they just, yeah. So I mean, definitely the one on page 16 is not the Canaletto view.
No.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, so I'll just delete the titles at the bottom and rely on the amendment to the green
top.
writing at the top.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I'm happy for that note to be accepted to the library. Oh, where's the other one gone? And then there was an email this morning I thought I had open. I did. Oh. No. With attachments anyway. One was an update on the location of nearby developments. Happy to accept that. That just updates the document that was already in. In fact, I'm happy just to replay for you to whoever's in charge of it to replace the document that's in with the updated one. That makes more sense. And then the court judgment.
Yeah, can I explain why I suggested putting that in? I'm sorry I didn't mention it to Mr. Linus or indeed Mr. Booth, I think, yesterday. I thought that it would be better, not that I suspect any of us is going to be making any strenuous submissions about it, but it's referred to in the Edith Summerskill House decision because it was in the works when the inspector wrote his report in Edith Summerskill, 4th of April, I think. And the High Court, he notes that the High Court judgment was awaited and it came out a couple of days afterwards, but was obviously in front of the Secretary of State. And the only, I'll put it in a footnote, ma'am, in the closing. The relevant part of it is the section which deals with, there are some comments, strictly speaking, kind of obiter, not part of the main judgment, comments by the judge about Bedford and the threshold between less than substantial and substantial, a couple of paragraphs. That's why I've put it in, just so that you've got it for fullness.
No problem with it going in.
Okay, thank you. So that can be accepted into. I see there's a front page to it as well, so thank you for that. Anything else arisen over the adjournment that I need to be made aware of? No, in which case we'll move on to the round table session then, character and appearance. So I suspect you'll be doing most of the legwork on this, Mrs. Stryak. So first of all, we're looking at bulk and height concerns, particularly of the Residents Association on bulk and height. So it seems simplest to me to take them each separately, Homebase and Tesco, and then I should have put it on here, and then together. Yep.
That's fine.
Do you want to outline your concerns to start the discussion? Thank you.
So in our proof of evidence on overdevelopment and out of character with the area in ID 1.14.2, we stated the bulk and height of 16 blocks of flats of up to 17 stories on the two sites would be in stark negative contrast with the character of the surrounding area and would dwarf and dominate its suburban and historic surroundings of mainly two-story houses. So if we have a look at Homebase now specifically, so the Homebase site is situated at the very edge of the Great West Corridor opportunity area, and it sits next to established low-rise residential areas to the southeast and southwest of the site, and low-rise commercial buildings to the east of the site. And there are a number of Grade 2 listed buildings in the vicinity of the site. So we, OGRA, believe that the Homebase proposal is overdevelopment of this site, out of character with the surrounding built environment. If I can turn to the officers' report, which is CD 5.2. I don't know if anyone wants to actually get that up on their screens. CD 5.2. And we're going to paragraph 8.120, 8.120.
No. 5.2.
Sorry, I haven't got it open in front of me, so I can't give you the PDF page.
5.2, 8.120. Thank you. It's 120. Thank you.
And so, I mean, it does in the officer's report state that this development is high density, and we are going to move on to density afterwards. But in 820, it says that policy D4, and this is a reference to the London plan, emphasizes the importance of appropriate design scrutiny. With the higher the density, the greater scrutiny, including from planning, design and conservation officers and design review. Now, we will be spending quite a bit of time going through the Hounslow Design Review panel report. So that's why I wanted to refer to that paragraph. And if we could go to paragraph 8.163. Which says LP policy D4 requires larger, higher density schemes to undergo additional design scrutiny, with this to include independent design review. Applicants are also required to explain how they have considered and addressed the design review recommendations. The application, and this is referring obviously to Homebase, but there's in brackets and the Tesco site, was considered by Hounslow's design review panel, both prior to submission and post-submission. Guidance on the role of such reviews is that they should not dictate the design of a scheme or contradict planning policy, but look to guide better design outcomes instead. Now, before we go into the various paragraphs that I'll refer to in the design review panel report, we have heard from the applicant on a number of occasions already during the inquiry that they don't have to take any notice of what the design review panel says. Okay, it can make statements and recommendations. But most of what's been put, these are eminent architects, eminent urban designers who have a view. And I remember when the design review panel report was published, we knew nothing about design review panels. We were just, it just concurred with so many of the views that we had of this development. So it was good to see that eminent architects and urban designers were saying what we felt. So if we can turn to the Hounslow Design Review Panel report from January 21, this is CD 3.12. Sorry, where does that appear?
I'm there, thank you.
Okay, so on page 2, under form and character, on a form and character, the second sentence there, it says, although there has been an improvement since the first review, both in massing and the architectural language, we still had real concerns about the overall quantity of development above the podium. So our question is, we find it difficult to understand why the heights and mass above the podium are so immense and out of proportion. What are the reasons for that, and why has nothing been done about doing something to address that problem?
Okay, thank you very much.
Ma'am, we'll obviously, I'll bring in, I think it's the only sensible way to deal with this kind of session from our point of view, because I've got my, as you can see, my cast of characters who you've met before, though I think maybe not in the flesh.
No.
So obviously Mr. Patel here, Mr. Fenn, who is Mr. Adams's colleague from JTP on Tesco, and obviously Mr. Roberts from previously. Dr. Mealy's behind just in case there's anything on heritage. And I'll just ask them to deal with specific points as a kind of, you know, guide really rather than anything else. I would just make on our joint behalf, if you like, a couple of initial comments though, which are good for the rest of the morning, I suspect, but I'll make them at the beginning. Ma'am, and that is that it isn't a fair characterization, as you'll appreciate, to say that the applicants ignored the DRP or took an attitude that they could ignore them. And the design and access statement shows that, ma'am, because it details, obviously, all the interactions that the teams had with the DRP and the extent to which they agreed and disagreed with the views of the DRP. And that, as you'll appreciate, is entirely normal in one of these cases. Not only do DRP comments act as guides on points that are accepted, but sometimes, quite often, the points are not accepted. And that doesn't prevent local authorities or indeed inspectors finding the schemes to be acceptable in due course. So that's the first point. But ma'am, on the generality of juxtaposition and difference between the scale of Homebase we're dealing with, I think, aren't we, at the moment, and the neighbourhood. First of all that we say this morning, we're going to keep things relatively brief. We rely, obviously, on what we said in the design section of the inquiry and what we've written in the design and access statements and in the design proofs. So we're not going to, I hope you'll find this an appropriate way forward, repeat everything in each case. So we do rely on that information that you've heard cross-examined already. But just on why it's different, can I ask Mr. Roberts just to deal with a couple of policy points which explain the background to why there's such a big difference, if you like, between the existing hinterland and the Homebase scheme? Okay. I think that would be the best way forward to begin with.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
We'll need the microphone quite close to you.
How's that? Okay.
I can hear you anyway. It's where the people at the back can. Yep, thank you.
Okay. I think the first point that we wanted to make really was about the stark contrast that you've mentioned, and you've talked about it as such a step change from the low-rise residential adjacent to what's proposed on Homebase, but also applies to the Tesco site. And I think as has been set out in our evidence before, and is throughout some of the emerging policy documents where they've analysed the area, the council have talked about this being a point of transition. It's part of the heritage and the character of the area going back. So a reference for you is in the Great West Corridor Master Plan, page 20, which is CD 10.39, where
Sorry, which paragraph?
It's page 20. Sorry, they're not numbered paragraphs there. But on page 20, they talk about the character of Osterley and Spring Grove and the residential, and the character then of the Great West Road. And so obviously you have the difference between the industrial character going east from Scion Lane, and then the residential low-rise character, and that having that point of transition is something that is there already. It is also it's part of the history of the area. So it's something that's dealt with in the architect's proofs as well, in terms of the Scion Lane forming a boundary between the Church Commissioner's land, where the residential was developed, and the industrial land along the Golden Mile.
Okay, thank you. So that's land use.
Well, I think it also goes to character as well. because there being a transition in terms of scale of buildings, both in terms of footprint and height, has been very different from the low-rise residential. So it's character as well as land use. Obviously, the two are related.
I think, ma'am, just to add in again, evidence that we've already given. Placemaking aspect of it is also relevant. So this is dealt with in. I won't ask Mr. Patel to go back over it, but in his evidence, you'll remember the point being made. It's also Mr. Adams's evidence on Tesco that these schemes aren't simply about optimising residential reuse of these two sites, because they're part of the change in the opportunity area to convert, starting with these important sites on the boundaries of the area, to start converting the Great West Road from this car-led area with large buildings set back from the road, which doesn't have much of a sense of place unless you're whizzing past it in a car, to a community. So you've got the new station coming in and buildings around there, and these two sites with much higher density residential on them. So it's also about the sense of place that's meant to be created.
Okay, thank you. Anything you want to respond to
If
there?
I can. So if I can pick up on the first point about the new station coming in. Sorry, we have not got any confirmation that a new station would be coming in, that it is funded and that's happening. So I just think we need to clarify that one, and we'll certainly be addressing that one again in our closing statement. There is no transition between these high buildings and the low two-rise buildings in the rest of the area. You've got an extreme change in scale there. It really is. You haven't got a step-down transition. And if I can refer to the access storage building, which we referred to, I think it was on day 2, when Mr. Patel was giving his evidence. If I can remind you, so the initial application for the access storage building was for a 14-storey block. And that was, I think if I remember correctly, that was then withdrawn by the applicant. And they then put an application for an 11-storey block, which was refused. And eventually a 6-storey block was approved. And in fact, it's a 5-storey block. And a lot of that was due to the fact that it was too high for the area, and also its position in relation to the heritage asset of the Gillette building across the road. So I can understand, and we accept everything that's said about the opportunity area, but you've got such a stark contrast that you just haven't got the transition. You're going from 2 stories straight up to high tower blocks.
And the access storage building is on the opposite side of
it's
Zion Lane. It's
yes,
on the,
exactly. Yes, it's just on the other side, as can be seen in our model, and which we'll look at then when we come to looking at some of our other evidence. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything from our side. Sorry, if I can say so, I've got 3 colleagues with me today. So Olga Szokalska, Sheila O'Reilly, and Mohsen Zikri. So they'll be chipping in as well. And again, I think you've met them all online
virtually,
before.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Right. Anybody want to add anything? I can move on to the next point.
If you want to move on, yes.
Yeah. So on page 2, halfway down of this of the Hounslow Design Review Panel report on Homebase, we've got again under form and character, the second paragraph. We agree that it is correct for the 17-storey tower to be the high point that steps down to a lower block at the corner. However, we feel that the tower does not have adequate space around it to be comfortable. In addition, its proportions appear wide from certain viewpoints, emphasized by how it adjoins the 10-storey infill blocks. So you've got this 17-storey high point. It's built up to the boundary of the site, and it gives an overly bulky and oppressive appearance. So why can't it be slimmer to fit in with its neighbours and be more elegant? These are the sorts of questions we've got.
Again, ma'am, this is a good example, I think, of where we will simply rely on what we've said already. If that's, unless you'd like specific comment. I mean, we have covered that obviously in the design evidence, and there was cross-examination, including I think on behalf of Vogra of the architects. And I won't keep repeating the point about DRP. These are matters of judgment, and we have formed, as obviously have Hounslow, a different view about the acceptability of the scheme.
Okay, so if you want to...
Sorry, I think we would like an answer. This is a bit like during the consultation process. We kept making comments. We didn't get answers.
Well, I don't think that's fair, ma'am, because look, design and access statement, long proofs of evidence, opportunity to cross-examine the architects themselves, which was taken. So this is a slightly unusual process, obviously, where we've had the design evidence, which is quintessentially bound up with character and appearance, and now we're having a separate session. I just don't want to repeat everything.
So this session was to capture issues that weren't perhaps fully aired.
Yes.
At the time.
But I think that point, why isn't it slimmer, questions of design we did cover before. Okay. So, ma'am, unless I make, I'm not seeking to close down any discussion, but I'm very keen that we don't repeat. I think it would be
helpful just to have a brief overview in response.
By all means, I'll ask Mr. Patel then, ma'am,
no,
just to, if he wouldn't mind, just to talk about the proportions, particularly on the corner and the composition leading up to the higher elements of the scheme, relatively briefly, please.
One of the important things for us in design terms was to arrange the buildings around to mark the important corner on Great West Road as an entrance from the west coming in. What was equally important was about celebrating the Gillette Tower and its prominence in the area as a local wayfinding marker going both north-south or east-west. Those are the important things. So we chose along that edge to create a building with steps down on the corner and steps gently back away from the view from Gillette Corner, going from east to west as you arrive from the Great West Road from the west to the east, and the tall element then sits on the eastern corner of the site itself. The building itself was carefully thought through its proportion to get an elegant composition with the buildings around it, and we think we are happy with that proportion and height and the appearance of the building as seen when traveling east to west in its immediate context and for the views around it from far away. Thank you.
Just add one more thing to that.
Sorry?
Maybe just add one more comment to that, please, as well.
Thank you, ma'am. I was just going to add one more point on the point you made about there not having been any attempt to transition within the design from the low-rise residential to the massing that's on the proposed site. And in the case of the home-based development, what there is clearly is the podium height and the references to the horizontal element of the Gillette building, which is a local contextual response. And you have the distance across Sign Lane of 40+ meters, and then the parts that rise up out of that podium they're separated and they're narrower. So you have, and we've in the appendices to the supplementary proof, we have some cross sections that deal with those distances and heights there to show the relationship.
We'll certainly come back to some of those points later, but we've still got reference to the 17-story tower high point, not enough adequate space around it, and it doesn't fit in with what's in the area. And again, we'll have a look at that when we have a look at some of the visuals. And then also in the at the top of page 2 of the design review panel statement, it does say that, hold on, in the second sentence, in the third sentence, despite your efforts to mitigate this with landscape design, we are still convinced that there would be insufficient space to accommodate the movements of 1,200 new residents and people walking to and from Scion Lane Station. So there's reference to the space around it. And I don't think, Mr. Patel, you addressed that particular issue about the what was said about the tower does not have adequate space around it to be comfortable.
Mr. Patel?
I think that's really more like a public realm and space for public movement, isn't it, around the edge of the site and people crossing Scion Lane and the main road. So I think, again, I don't know whether you want to say anything, Simon, about that.
Yeah, well, the context for these comments, I think, in terms of the design review panel's comments in there, it's in the section about footprint, and it really goes to the brief for the site and the concerns they had in terms of the scale of the Tesco the proposed Tesco footprint on the Homebase site, which it's obviously, as we've explained previously, is quite a fundamental part of unlocking the regeneration across the two sites. They were looking for more public realm, and more space is actually something they noted as an improvement, particularly in terms of the amphitheatre area on the Great West Corner Road, as an improvement in terms of the public realm from the first DRP session. But again, you've seen their comments there about they think there should be more public realm.
Okay, I don't know if my colleagues want to make any points before I move on to the next one.
Thanks, Barbara. Ma'am, it's fair to say that this side of the room actually remain unconvinced of the arguments put forward by Mr. Patel and Mr. Roberts. As my colleague here, Riak, said, it's at variance with the report produced by eminent architects, designers, and planners, and we concur with all of them. So for all that to be dismissed is just unacceptable, and we remain unconvinced.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I can move on to the next point, then. So,
Madam, if I may, very, very briefly, just before Ms. Stanek moves on, I mean, you'll have noted the council isn't seeking to take a particularly active role in this session. It hasn't designed the schemes. Those that have, or representatives of them, are here, and so we're very much leaving it to Mr. Warren and his team. But there are a couple of observations that we do need to make in this context. Yes, just in relation to the point just made. For one thing, we do echo what has been said by Mr. Warren as regards the design review panel. It's not a situation, certainly as the council understands it, that the observations of that panel have been ignored. On the contrary, they have been engaged with. More than that, though, whilst the panel, and indeed similar panels up and down the country, do provide a very valuable consultative function, they do not have powers of determination, and their views are not law, so to speak. And so whilst the council and indeed other local planning authorities do pay serious regard to the observations of those panels, jurisdiction in terms of decision making and ultimate judgment lies with the planning authority, or indeed in this case, madam, with yourself and the Secretary of State. So it's important that we pay heed to, but we do not overstate the significance of the comments of the panel and indeed such panels. The other point I just wish to make was, because it is something the council has has paid serious regard to, is Ms. Stanek's comment as regards the, as I understood it, what she terms the abrupt juxtaposition of this taller development with development across the road at Scion Lane, and she noted the storage facility which had dropped in terms of its height. Madam, the point's been made already by Mr. Roberts, but we do echo it. The fact is, this development does not simply jump to its tallest point across Scion Lane. Rather, it steps up. And indeed, man, one can see this from Ms. Stanek's model in the inquiry venue this morning. There is a staggering of heights. And it is not right to say that there is this abrupt transition and immediate transition from the one side of the road to the other. But madam, as I say, I'm not going to detain you anymore. We're not going to jump in here, there and everywhere, but I did just want to make those points.
Thank you very much.
My name is Striak, not Stanek.
I do apologise. I do apologise. It's been such a long time since we were introduced to one another. I'd put that down wrongly. Thank you.
Right, if I can move on to, right, where were we? Yeah, so I'm on page 2 of the of CD 3.12. Sorry, let's move this closer. So again, under form and character, third paragraph down, and I think this follows on from what Mr. Roberts was saying. So third paragraph down, it was felt the 7-storey blocks fronting Scion Lane were too close together. Removing one of these blocks could supply some much needed breathing room to the Podium Gardens. So question, what's the rationale for so many buildings being so close together? How can future residents fully enjoy the benefits of the Podium Gardens? Again, this relates, I know this is amenity space, but it relates to the fact that you've got this bulk and height and massing.
So, sorry, what are you?
So yes, so the removal of one of the blocks plus a redesign would benefit future residents and the outlook of those already here. So why hasn't that been done? Why hasn't there been a redesign?
Okay.
As recommended by the design review panel.
You need to appreciate that the inquiry is to discuss the scheme that's before us, not some other possible alternative scheme. So it's looking at the effects of the building as that is proposed.
Okay.
If that helps focus your
and this is what's
thoughts.
interesting about the Hounslow Design Review Panel. So we had the first review in October 2019. The applicant, and I think, yes, some of the points I think were addressed then. The application went in September 2020. And then you've got the Hounslow Design, and we didn't know about that because that was never published. We didn't find out about the first one, and we weren't given access to that report until the second one had been published. So the second one was published 4 months after the planning application went in. So presumably the applicant had the choice of either not doing very much as a result of that Hounslow Design Review Panel recommendation, or withdrawing the application and taking note of all of the comments in there and doing a redesign. So it just seems, as a layperson, it just seems like,
I mean, that's the
the
time,
sequence of events just seems odd.
So pre-application and during the life of a planning application, things will potentially change. Potentially applications might get withdrawn, might go back to the drawing board, all sorts of things. But when you're at this stage now, we're just looking at what's proposed and its merits or disbenefits or whatever. It's this scheme that we have to focus on.
So these are the comments on bulk and massing from the Residents Association.
Okay, if I can go on to the next point.
So we're still on bulk and height.
Yes,
and,
yes,
and
we're
the-
on, yeah,
and the
still on
massive
bulk and height. Yes, we've still got
Colster said.
quite a few few more points to make.
Okay.
So another quote, and I'm not quite sure where this one, which page this one appears on, but it says, we were not yet convinced that it is workable to have a podium 4 stories above ground level with areas of blank frontage along Scion Lane. This does not give enough this does not give enough back to the public realm and would not create a pleasant environment at street level. So you've got the podium 4 stories above ground level on Scion Lane, gives rise to a blank frontage facing the 2-story family homes on the Northumberland estate, which is an area of special character, and doesn't maintain or improve the public realm there, nor create a pleasant environment at street level. So again, what's your response to that?
So you're asking how this scheme addresses the street level?
Yes. And again, because of its bulk and height.
Mm-hmm.
Just give the reference.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think it's perhaps helpful just to direct you to, it is a point that Mr. Patel went through in his evidence, but a couple of references in his proof. Firstly, page 79, which deals with the point about the breaks between the 7-storey elements that pop up above the podium and the gaps of 35 plus meters that you've got between them. And then secondly, just a couple of pages before that on 76, you've got areas of active frontage around at ground level, which wrap around both Sign Lane and onto the corner of the Great West Road as part of the activity that the Tesco store would provide.
Just add one reference for your note, ma'am. I'll do this a couple of times, I suspect, as we go through, but on that point in particular, the views of the officers as reported to the council are at 8.169 of the officers' report. That's core document. Where are we? 5.2.
Yeah.
8.169, particularly about the public realm and the relationships between scale and so on.
Ms. Striak, did you want to say any more about the street level?
Do any of you want to make any comments?
I mean, we remain of the same view. It's just,
I can't hear you, sorry.
we remain of the same view.
You need to, can you get the microphone any closer? If you move the coffee cup, will that get it closer?
We remain of the same view that the buildings are too close together, too dense, too much development.
Sorry. Ma'am, can I just add to that? Now, in addition to the height of the Podium building, anybody walking on the pavement, it's a very long journey from the beginning of the Podium to the end, actually. And that really corroborate our views that not enough thought has been put in trying to enhance the public realm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I also add, it's not just the setback that's not there for these very tall buildings, but it's also how the quality of life of future residents would be if they were to try to use the podium between the buildings. I wouldn't have thought that was a pleasant experience given the mass and bulk.
Okay. I mean, we've sorry.
General height. It just doesn't look as if it's going to work.
Okay. We had a separate discussion session on the future residents and the usability of the podium level terrace and the facilities there. So we're looking at bulk and height in relation to character and appearance in this session. Thank you.
Yes, so if I can refer to page 2 again in the Homebase Hounslow Design Review Panel report, top of page 2, overall footprint. So it says, as raised in the previous review, the size of the Tesco store, associated back of house areas and servicing bay has resulted in an overly large footprint that occupies most of the ground floor of the scheme. The issue remains constraining the public realm to the edges of the site. And then we are still not convinced that there will be sufficient space to accommodate the movements of 1,200 new residents and people walking to and from Sign Lane Station. So I've already mentioned that. But at the bottom of that paragraph, it says, we iterate both to Hounslow and the applicant that the site will only be able to successfully accommodate a mixed-use development if the brief is challenged at ground floor. So it looks like they're recommending that the footprint should be reduced to safely accommodate public movement and to give more to the public realm. So how has this been addressed?
So you're asking what the response to the those comments?
Yes, please.
How that was dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a point that we've already made, but it's about the fundamental part of the brief that the Tesco footprint relates to, and the opportunity that then unlocks in terms of the wider opportunity. So I think, again, the same point was made in terms of between the two design review panels, the improvements that were made, and introducing, I think there's in excess of 2,000 square meters of public realm space provided on the Homebase site, including on the corner. So that was as a response and as an improvement to the scheme.
Does anyone from our group want to make any comment on that? In that case, I'll move on if that's okay, ma'am.
Thank you.
So if we go to the conclusion on page 4 of the of this document, of this letter, in the second sentence, the end of that second sentence, it says, "We are still certain that the footprint of Tesco is compromising your ability to provide public realm that is good enough in character or scale for this quantum of new housing." So the suggestion there is that if you reduce the quantum, that would improve the ability to provide public realm. So again, have these concerns been addressed? How have you addressed them, please?
So, ma'am, I think by way of answer, without repeating ourselves, can I give you another reference, 8.172 in the officer's report to committee core document 5.2. So that having taken into account what we said, what the DRP said, what local people said, the view, and of course what the GLA said in support, obviously, of the design, the officers reported taking this point in part, ma'am. The requirements, they said, for the Tesco store and the resultant podium design has in part compromised the layout and overall form of the development. So it was recognised by officers that if you're going to replace the Tesco and successfully redevelop the site for functional purposes, then you couldn't have other things. You have to make a choice. But they then went on to say that it would be more assertive than had more generous building setbacks been provided. Nevertheless, the massing of the blocks and location of taller elements is taken into account surrounding context of the site, as well as nearby buildings of character, and they don't consider that there would be a demerit or a downside in relation to public movement and public realm overall. So they formed a judgment, but it's very important, obviously, ma'am, as you'll appreciate, that when you're designing a scheme with multiple objectives in mind, there has to be a balance struck between the different factors involved.
And any comments from our group?
I think we'll be repeating ourselves if we comment on that, because we've already made the comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on to our document ID 1.14.17, which is our Appendix D visuals of our 3D model of the proposed developments, 1.14.17. And we've actually got the model here in front of us, and these are then visuals, photographs taken of the model. Okay.
Yep.
Are you there, ma'am? So in the so at the top you've got a photograph of the full model, and then you've got underneath that Gillette Corner from Sine Lane Station and Gillette Corner from A4 eastbound. So if you look how the block on the Homebase site towers over the maisonettes opposite and over the 5-storey access storage building. And again, you can see that. So you can see that in both those photographs. So I think this goes back to what was being said about that, you know, you've got the podiums and you've got the infills and it doesn't look so bad. But it's when you look at that photograph that you can really see how huge it is on that Homebase site compared to these suburban 2-storey maisonettes. You know, surely you have to agree with that. I mean, it's not, you've got a huge contrast there. And I can't understand how you don't see that there is such a huge contrast.
Okay, thank you. Can I just check, first of all, we've had the model on display this week, and we did on the first day when we came. Am I right in thinking that you don't take any issue with the, I appreciate they're not rendered, the blocks aren't rendered or anything like that, but do you take any issue with the model itself?
Indeed, we do.
You do?
We certainly do. Yes, absolutely. And you've anticipated. The first thing I was going to say, ma'am, about these are obviously, I think they are, even though the quality of the images is slightly strange, but if they are photographs of the model that you can see in the room, then absolutely we do. We have grave concerns about the accuracy of the model.
You're just talking about the photographs or the model itself?
Well, both really. I mean, it's assuming, as we're told, that they are photographs of the model. The fundamental problem is with the accuracy of the model. So it's not confirmed in any way how this has been done. We don't think it's verified, and we don't accept that it's accurate. Much more accurate, obviously, ma'am, are the verified views that you have in the evidence before you, which have been done according to tested methodology and can be relied on.
So what elements of the model or the photo lead you to that view?
Well, ma'am, I think
It's just that it hasn't been tested, or there's something obviously wrong.
That's one of the problems, ma'am. But I don't know whether you've been and looked in any detail at
We
the
can
model.
all go and have a look. If you want to put it in the middle, we can have a look.
I'm happy, ma'am, for you. It's not really. It's up to you, ma'am. But we're happy for you just to have a look at it in a break or whenever you'd like to. Our fundamental concerns are about whether it accurately represents the scale relationship between the setting and the buildings. We don't understand, obviously, precisely how it's been created, and we don't accept that it can be verified. And so we've looked at it and we don't accept it.
Right, but that's because you've got no way of double checking. You're not telling me that there's something obviously wrong.
Well, ma'am, I think if you go and look at the scale of Gillette in relation to the parameters for the Tesco building, for instance, you'll see immediately there may be concerns about the accuracy of the relative scale there. That's something that we obviously immediately notice. But yeah, so ma'am, when you have a look at the model, if you remember the drawings and the verified views, I think this point's been mentioned already this morning. One of the key design moves was to try and align the shoulder of the Tesco scheme at the front on Cyan Lane with the main element, the horizontal element of the Gillette building. You have a look at that, ma'am, when you have a look at the model. That's one of the things that's led us to be concerned about it. I mean, leaving aside, ma'am, how you...
So just to be clear, which
Yes.
part of the Homebase building are you calling the shoulder on that corner?
Do you want to deal with it?
The reference there was actually to the Tesco site.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah. So on the Cyan Lane frontage of the Tesco scheme, you have the terraced houses, the front Cyan Lane, and then in between those you have the taller blocks, and the height of those taller blocks runs across to the height of the shoulder of the Gillette building, and there is a reference, isn't there, Mr. Fenny, in the design access statement, which we can get you the reference of, which actually shows the line going across, and that's one of our questions with the accuracy of the model.
So the taller block, you're saying the taller blocks on the Cyan Lane frontage of the Tesco site, yeah, are intended to align with
The shoulder of the Gillette building.
the shoulder. So what are you calling the shoulder of the Gillette building?
The horizontal.
It's the
main
spreading
horizontal
arm,
range.
but yeah. Okay.
I'd like to come back to the 3D model later when we've talked about bulk and height and density, because I think that is a separate issue. But again, looking at the photographs, I don't think my point has been answered about how high the Homebase site looks compared to the 2-storey maisonettes, particularly in Northumberland Gardens, and even compared to the 5-storey access storage building.
So that's you're expressing a view there, yes?
Yes, I
Yes.
don't think the point's been addressed. The model's been questioned, but we'll come back to the model later.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add over and above anything you've already said about the relationship of Homebase to that Scion Lane frontage? And the
No,
area
obviously
to the-
we don't accept, obviously, Mum, that hasn't been addressed. We have addressed it, and we did that in part in the session with the architects, with Mr. Patel. But plainly, ma'am, it's a judgment, when you're forming a view about this point, you'll have regard, I'm sure, to the visualisations which have been taken from ground level, from within that area, across Scion Lane, from Northumberland Gardens, and your form of view on that basis, which we'd invite you to.
Okay, thank you.
Right, if we can move on to ID 1.14.14, which are Mike Spence's verified visualizations.
Sorry, can you give me the reference again, please?
Yeah.
ID 1.
ID 1.14.14. And if we have a look at Viewpoint 10, please. Whatever. So I
Mine's
think
still
it's-
loading, hold fire.
Yeah.
There we go.
Sorry, so this is taken from the Trees Estate, which is sort of southeast.
Let me just get
Sorry,
to,
Mum, are you there?
just get to view 10. Yep.
So what we call the Trees Estate, which is on the southeastern side of the railway line, and lies considerably lower than the Homebase site, because Gillette Corner is sort of at a peak there. So you've got this marked difference in height in relation to the Trees Estate. You're obviously aware that the maximum height envisaged in the emerging plan for the south corner of the Homebase site is 46.4 AOD, whereas the scheme proposed here is 61.7, 73.7 AOD. So again, you can see how huge the massing, the bulk, the scale is very, very big and out of character with this, again, suburban area lower down, and so it looks even higher. Sorry, my colleague. Go on.
I would like to talk about topography of the site a little bit, because the topography is important in deciding the location and of tall buildings and the height of tall buildings. So I would like to refer you to London Borough Hounslow Urban Context and Character study document, which is CD 10.38. In CD 10.38, Urban Context and Character Study, the description of Golden Mile and Gillette Corner is this. So on page 33, we read in the first paragraph, the area around Gillette Corner is one of the most elevated in the borough, with views southeastward across Isleworth to Richmond Hill and North Downs beyond. For this reason, the Gillette Buildings clock tower and any potential tall buildings in this area is all the more prominent. So there's the reference. This is one of the most elevated sites. Gillette Corner is one of the most elevated sites in the borough. If you if you look at the information about the topography of the site, so the Homebase site, the height of the Homebase site is between 20 and 24 meters AOD. And the area southeast, so the Trees Estate, and then down towards Zion, Bush Corner, and it's much lower. So we've got the difference in height. I mean, if you look at the topography map of Hounslow, anything below the railway line towards
Below the what line, sorry?
the railway line, which is a Zion station, and there's a railway line, which is bordering the site. So anything below is colored in blue, which is basically the height between 7 and 11 meters, 13 meters AOD. And anything above is it's colored in red.
Green and red.
Yes, but the site, yes. So there's a big difference in height, as much as 10 meters. So what happens that those buildings that we've got on the southeastern side, where we've got a building that is 10 meters high and another building that is 15 meters high, to the Trees Estate, those buildings will appear, because of the difference in the height of the location, they will appear as they are another 3 or 4 meters higher.
At least.
At least. I mean, there's some mention that there's within the site, Homebase site, there's a drop of 4 meters. So at the top of Great West Road, the height is about 24 meters AOD. At the bottom, at the railway line, it's only 20. So the other buildings, the taller buildings behind, again, they will appear high in the landscape. So this is the visual impact of this mass of buildings is going to be greater for all those residents on the Trees Estate.
Okay. So I think the question ultimately is, how has the topography of the site and its relationship to the topography of the surrounding area been taken into account?
I'll ask Mr. Patel briefly to talk about topography and how that was considered. But just before that, ma'am, for your note, we don't accept, as you know, the work of Mr. Spence as being accurate. C, in respect of the particular view that's been referred to, ID 1.17.3, that's the AVR rebuttal appendix, if you remember, ma'am, where those views are gone through and shown, in that case, included to be inaccurate. Page 40 for that view. So that's the point about the views, and it's obviously regrettable that has fed in part anyway to the concerns that residents have, that they're relying on unreliable images. But in terms of topography, distance seen from the south of the rail or the other side of the railway, where the levels are lower, I wonder whether Mr. Patel would just say something.
Well, I don't think it was just the other side of the railway. It's the Trees Estate.
And the
well.
Trees Estate,
Yes.
forgive me, ma'am. Yeah.
On laying this, I've talked about the proof of evidence, how we laid the buildings across. There is a slope on the site, which we look to integrate within the public realm and within the building. And we've created a sort of a service area at the station end to incorporate all the servicing for the building itself. The building's been designed as a collection of 5 buildings sitting around of different characters, sitting like an urban block. And as Mr. Porter described earlier, the buildings addressing Sign Lane have the edge been designed to create a podium along that road, which picks up the reference back to the Gillette Tower and the horizontal datum that has been set within that. And then we have 4 gable ends that articulate that edge of a different height that comes down within that. We've stepped the building away from the view as you come up from the station. As you come out, trying to orient yourself to go north, to step the buildings away from the Sign Lane edge, and especially on Gillette Corner, so that when you come down out there, you've got the 4-story podium building picking reference from Gillette the Gillette building from the distance across there. The Gillette Tower is allowed to express its prominence and celebrate its importance as a townscape marker within the site to guide you as a townscape marker running through it. So the buildings be designed to step back to take in account the topography and the townscape views and celebrate the Gillette building itself in its podium and its tower itself. And similarly, running from west to east, as you run across, as a different response to the topography in the sense of, again, we've stepped the building away from the corner and we've located the tower that marks the important entrance into Great West Road on the northeastern end of the building itself.
The thing that was in, sorry, ma'am,
you talked about views walking up from the station, and you said there was stepping back there.
Yeah.
Can you take me to a plan?
We can take it. Would it be good to look at the, when you say plan, ma'am, we can look at elevations or the image, the verified image.
Images will be fine.
That's in
those are more accessible
core document 10.51. We looked at this in the context of the heritage quite recently, ma'am. 10.51, that bundle of consolidated images. And there's, I think Dr. Mealy went through this, didn't he? That there's the image at page 5. You've got it in a hard copy there, ma'am, I think. So coming up, you're standing very near the station.
Doesn't go far enough, only further back towards the station.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's very near those railings there. Obviously, when you step out of the station sign in the top left-hand corner. So it's
on page
right.
5.
Yes, on page 5. Page 5. Yeah. That's the one. Yeah. So just in the top left-hand corner, you can see the sign. Bit of the sign. You're right. You're right.
Yeah. For some reason, I was looking bottom right.
I'm sorry.
I don't know why.
It's right there by the railings that protect the people as they come out of the station.
So on the corner.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand where the stepping back is.
It's a step. It's stepping back on. You can see the stepping back is in two forms. It's on page 6. You see across how the building. Sorry. You can see on page 6 how the building steps back from the corner itself.
That's from the Gillette corner. No, I'm talking about the other corner nearest the station.
Sorry to correct it. From the station, we've looked at creating a horizontal datum onto the building itself. It picks up the podium of the Gillette Tower, make references back again, and then obviously you've got the 4 gable ends that mark and articulate the street itself.
But I'd understood you to say, on the approach from the station, the building was stepped back on the corner, and then you talked about. Then you went to Gillette Corner. I wanted to understand what you were saying about this corner next to the station.
Sorry, I maybe didn't express it quite clearly, but it was about.
So you said stepped away from the station is the words I wrote here.
Sorry.
So it's okay.
Yes, obviously, ma'am, there's a difference between, in terms of sensitivity, if you like, between the area right outside the station. So there's the station vegetation and the railway line, which you'll have seen, relatively less sensitive than a bit further up.
I understand that, but it was to do with the question. This started off with the topography rising up from the station, and so I was interested in what you had to say about the corner, which you started, and as I say, you said you stepped back, then you went back to the Gillette corner and the stepping back there. So there's no stepping back on the corner by the station.
No,
that's what I understood.
You're quite right, ma'am.
I thought maybe I had misunderstood from what you were saying.
No, it's our fault, ma'am. And you may remember from the original session with Mr. Patel a while ago, there was discussion about why that building component has been not stepped back, and why it's that high, because it acts as a marker to some extent of the station building itself. So we haven't cut away opposite the station. There needs to be something there. The other point, I think there was reference to page 6, which I know wasn't the right one at the time in the discussion, but from the estate opposite, that there is a separate point which is also relevant to this conversation, it seems to us, about the way that the design doesn't present in those views its tallest component foremost. You do get the stepping away, which isn't just about Gillette Corner and the Gillette Tower, but has an effect in townscape terms seen from that residential area. And ma'am, The general point that I think was implied in what Mr. Patel said, but you'll take into account, is about distance and perspective as well as just AOD heights and topography. And that, it's very important to take into account those real world effects when assessing the juxtapositions that we have here.
Anything else on topography?
Ma'am, can I just
Yes, Mr. Sikri.
add, my colleague here mentioned topography and the fact that topography will really accentuate the difference between the proposed development and the houses and masonettes on the Tree Estate. And regardless of any criticism that side of the room would have on either scale of the model or the views taken by Mike Spence, the fact remains that the development is, in terms of height, is multiples of the two-story houses there. So that would fall into insignificant. The fact is, and as everybody would have seen, this is the effect. You can dispute as much as you like the accuracy of Mike Spence photographs, but the fact remains that you're talking about multiples. You're comparing in terms of height multiples of the height of the masonettes.
I don't think
So-
there's no doubt that there's a difference in height between what's the houses opposite and what's proposed.
Yeah,
as a
but
matter of
we,
fact.
we were under the impression that this side of the room was disputing the accuracy and hence, the difference in height.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So in this picture, we're looking at building C, which is 10 stories high, and building B3, which is 15 stories height. And you didn't really answer my question, how you decided on this height of the buildings on this corner.
So just to be clear, which corner are you talking about now?
This is southeasterly. So this is the side facing the railway line across from.
So it's
Tree
that corner
Estate.
we just looked at by the station. Okay.
Yes.
So
Sorry, forgive me, I did touch on that because I referred back to Mr. Patel's evidence on why it was the right thing in townscape terms to have a component of that height at that location by the
perhaps
station.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Patel.
Yes, of
on that.
course,
Yep,
ma'am.
thank you.
In looking at the composition of the buildings and how we distribute the massing and the height around the building, obviously a whole range of views had to be taken into account, which we have done. We also needed to kind of respond to particular conditions and characters of areas we're in. We responded to the Great West Road in the Woodbine. We also at this end wanted to mark this development to mark a change to Sign Lane on this end of the site. So we wanted to locate a building of that scale to mark the entrance to the main residential entrance to the entire residential scheme that sits above the Tesco store, and to make a definitive end to the building, and that's how we justify the height of the building.
So are you treating it like a sort of a bookend?
It's a bookend. It's a bookend response.
I mean, we were discussing earlier the appropriate heights for this site, and there are a number of documents in the emerging plan that specify the maximum or the appropriate height for the site. And for this location, it says that the height shouldn't be higher than 49.4 AOD.
Can I just
Well,
be clear
actually-
about what document you're referring
Well,
to there?
CD10, CD1039, Great West Corridor Master Plan Capacity Study.
That's for the,
CD 10.39.
is that the capacity study for the Great West Road opportunity area?
Yes, but that feeds into all the other documents, into the site allocations and the emerging plan. So in page 182, when it discusses the site and the height of the buildings, It says Great West Corridor and diagonally across from Zion Lane. So the highest point, it says it should not be higher than 49.4 meters AOD. And north, to the north and to the south side says 46.4 meters AOD to the south side. And what we've got here, building C, we've got 55.9 meters plus 1.8 meter, so it's about 62 meters. Building C, and building B, B3, the 15-story building, it says 71.95 plus 1.8 meters, so it's basically around 73 meters AOD. So a difference of about 27 meters higher than what's specified here as a maximum height.
So in essence, what's your question?
Yes, why you've decided on this height in this location?
In the light of the advice in the capacity study?
Exactly.
Yep.
If you would like to hear from Mr. Patel again on that, by all
think that'd
means,
be
and then I'll
helpful.
give you one reference, ma'am, to the
Thank you.
document that you have before you.
The height and the edge of building B, as you're referring back to, and the southern edge is then thought of as an entire composition of views itself. I've described this building at the southern edge being a bookend, and we wanted to mark that and the Gillette building as two bookends, so have an appropriate height within that. Block B itself is articulated to create a shoulder height and a skyline between buildings B1, B2, and B3. As we worked through the DRP comments and the planners' comments to create an articulation and a skyline to describe that particular edge. So all those buildings have been carefully distributed in massing terms to achieve an overall visual composition and achieve the vision for the opportunity area.
So just so that I'm clear, that you felt it's appropriate to go higher than the heights set out in the capacity study, that you felt that those heights in the capacity study wouldn't create it sufficient of a gateway?
Yes. In looking at this at the building at the overall massing and the distribution of height across the building and the opportunity area that the site provided, and considering all the views and the impacts and the gateways we want to create, we thought that height was appropriate, is appropriate. And of course, ma'am, it's about the overall composition of all the heights and all the building coming together.
Can the council help, please, how those heights were arrived at in the capacity study?
Yeah, thank you, madam. So the capacity study provides a lot of detail on how that exercise was undertaken. It would be difficult to summarise it, I think, but it's all in there. There's a chapter on the methodology. The master plan is an exercise in demonstrating how the opportunity could be delivered, and I know that Mr. Roberts and I both gave a lot of evidence in our planning evidence on the status of that document and that it's an example of delivery, as I say. The site allocation policies, the emergency site allocation policies, which I'll find the reference for both sites, explain that the master plan heights are an indicator, a starting point perhaps, and that if heights taller than those set out in the master plan are to be advanced, they should be robustly demonstrated as being acceptable through townscape and heritage analysis, and the council says that's been done in this case.
Can I give you that reference, ma'am?
Yes, thank you.
I know you've looked at this before, but it's relevant directly to that point about topography and the relationship. You do have in Appendix 3 to ID 1.10.4 a section through there which cuts across the railway, which shows the AODs and as well as the heights of the building. So you can take a view. Broadly speaking, There's 60 plus meters separation looking that way across the railway line from these buildings, and you can see the heights of the buildings that are proposed in relation to that. And I won't repeat the evidence, ma'am, that we've said about the acceptability of that relationship.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, in reference to the document.
You need to
that-
be closer to the microphone
Okay.
again.
So in reference to the document we were looking at, the Great West Corridor Master Plan and Capacity Study, CD 10.39, I see something in Mr. Roberts' evidence proof, ID 1.7.1. So in paragraph 10.4, relationship with heights in Great West Corridor Master Plan and Great West Corridor Local Plan. So it
So
says,
you'll have to speak more slowly. I'm trying to make
Okay.
notes.
so what it says
So
here.
you're in
that-
Mr. Roberts' proof at paragraph 10.4.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it says the Great West Corridor Master Plan and Capacity Study is a vision and spatial framework for the Great West Corridor. It is a material consideration in its own right and also forms part of the evidence base for the draft policies in the site allocations and the Great West Corridor Local Plan. So it says that it is a material consideration. The council has identified indicative heights it considers appropriate in Great West Corridor Master Plan, and these heights are referenced in the draft policies in the Great West Corridor Local Plan.
So again, what your point, your question?
Well, you know, what it says on the site allocations in various documents is with references the height, it says no higher. So there's a specific height defined as is no higher than.
So Mr. Smith, do you want to just quickly deal with that in terms of the policy?
Yeah, thank you, Madam. Yeah, I think it's the same point. So I found the references now, which are at CD 7.1. So it's 7.1.1 is the emerging site allocation for Tesco, and 7.1.2 is Homebase, and that's where I'm just trying to find the particular reference, but that's where reference is made to the master plan heights being the starting point, and alternative heights should be justified otherwise. So I think everyone in the room has agreed that the master plan is clearly relevant. It's a material consideration as reference, but it's not the be all and end all. It's not the start and the finish of this exercise.
And just on reading Mr. Roberts' evidence, ma'am, obviously you have to read the whole of section 10.4.
Mm-hmm.
You'll remember he expresses a view about limited weight to be given to the document at the moment in terms of, setting markers or anything of that kind. Very important to understand everything that he says about that
Thank
point.
you.
I'd like to come back to what Mr. Warren was saying about the veracity of Mike Spence's visuals. Mike Spence isn't here today, but we heard in his evidence where he robustly defended his views and also questioned some of the visuals that were prepared by the applicant. However, I come back to visual 10, which we looked at, so the views from the Trees estate. I don't think we saw a comparative or a comparable visual from the applicant to show the view from the Trees estate. And if I can go back to early March 2020, so this was before the pandemic, this was when we were involved in the consultation with the applicant. And I remember, I think I spent 2 afternoons cycling around the whole area, taking photographs from lots and lots of different viewpoints. I think I took about 150 photographs. And I informed the applicant about this, that we'd taken these views, and could they have a look at them and consider them so that we could then see what the development would look like from there. This no response. This was not taken up, and we haven't seen a comparative view of this. So I'm coming back to this visual 10, where you can see that it is really high, out of character with the area, and shows the bulk and height of the development.
Okay, so just to be clear, you were asking the applicant to do views from around 150
Well,
points.
no, I wasn't asking
No.
them to do 100 because I'm not the, you know, I know I've lived in the area. I know the area. So that's why I cycled round to see from all sorts of different areas what it would look like. And it was interesting then that, you know, that we heard from Mr. Spence that views should have been taken from much further away, you know, like Richmond Hill and Harrow on the Hill, which I'd never thought of because I wouldn't have thought you'd see them. But from our area, taking all these photographs. And again, that wasn't taken into account. And then we were just presented with what was in the planning application.
So when the photos, the viewpoints were selected, that it's usual, and it's my understanding this happened in this case, that the applicant works with the council. I'm not sure if they worked with Historic England at that time to narrow down the viewpoints that they felt were most pertinent, because you just can't take photos.
Of course.
And with the and then digitally put the development behind them on all the viewpoints that everybody might want. You have to go to the ones that are perhaps the most critical. Then as the evidence has emerged, more viewpoints have come to light in discussion with Historic England, particularly with relation to the heritage assets. So there is quite a lot of evidence before us. I'm not sure, is there a viewpoint that's comparable to the one at Mr. Spence's view 10?
Yeah, it's the reference I gave you
Sorry.
earlier on, ma'am. No, sorry. On page 40 of 1.17.3.
And sorry, what does that show?
Page 40.
Page 40 of 1.17.3.
Yeah,
It's part of the AVR critique of why Mr. Spence's images are incorrect, and it was one of the points that I put to him when I was cross-examining him about these images earlier in the year. So that's MSE view 10, and AVR's analysis of why it's not to
So
be
it was an
relied on.
ID 17.
ID 1.17.3, page 40.
Of ID, not CD.
Page 40.
There's a cover page on page 40 PDF, ma'am. Sorry, page 37 and following in the hard copy. And so you'll see the critique in paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 in that section, and what Mr. Robson and his colleagues in AVR have said.
Page.
Are you in the hard copy, ma'am?
That view?
No. We're looking, I think, aren't we, at MSE view 10? Yeah.
Yes.
It's.
I've got 1.17.3, page 40 was the reference you gave me.
Yeah, page 40 in the PDF, in the hard copy, page 38.
Thank you.
Sorry, ma'am.
Yeah.
So you'll see there in the bottom right-hand corner, it says MSE view 10.
Yeah.
In the main copy, and then you'll see the critique that's set out in the paragraphs by AVR.
So we've got Mr. Spence in the pink and the applicants in the green outline.
Yes,
I'm
so sorry, ma'am. Yes. So we have the MSE image, and then you'll see the reasons why AVR don't consider it to be accurate.
Okay.
It's an example of the methodological issues that I cross-examined Mr. Spence about. And just coming back to your point, ma'am, the one that was agreed to be studied as a representative example of that relationship with the estate was the one that we've looked at before, where you can see the corner of Homebase stepping away from the estate. So that was the one we looked at a few moments ago.
The one from the station, the one with the station in the corner.
That's from a totally different place.
From site. That's from Sign
the
Lane,
station.
Not the station on the corner.
No.
That's from the Northumberland estate on the other side of the sign.
Do you remember we went on in 1051 to that one there? It's page 6 of 10.51. Do you remember? And when we were looking at the issues around Sign Lane, Mr. Patel referred to this, and then he was taken back to the point about the one by the station. And then we said, and of course, there's this one, page 6, AVRB, where this was the agreed position with the authority to illustrate representative views from that general location.
Yeah, we did. We looked at page 5 and went over to
We'll
page
come on
6.
to that view in a moment, but
Okay.
at the moment we've been looking at the Trees Estate and we haven't had a comparable view from the Trees Estate from the applicant. And when you have a
Well,
look at, sorry,
Ms. Striak, page, well, I've got it as
at
actual
page 40, yes,
Yes,
exactly.
yeah.
But that's just a bit of overdrawing on Mike
But it's the
Spence's
same.
image.
Yes, but it's from that view with the development outline shown in the background.
It's not a separate view taken by from what I can understand.
Okay.
However, the bulk and height remain the same. High, it's just moved slightly to the right-hand side.
Okay.
The point about the bulk and height remains.
Okay, thank you.
Right, can I move on?
Yes, please.
So can we have a look at viewpoint 11 in Mike Spence's visualizations, ID 1.14.14. So this is the view taken from the footbridge over the A4 near Curry's PC World.
You have to bear with me because I can only have one open at a time. So it's ID 1.14. 1.14 point
It's 1.14.14
14.
and it's viewpoint 11. And I know there is a view from lower down from, I think, near the bus stop that was taken by the applicant. And then I think when we were looking at the heritage evidence and the Coty building the other day, we also saw another viewpoint. And all of these show how high, how huge these buildings would be on the Homebase site. And, you know, just look at the comparison with the access storage building, which, you know, we've already heard from local residents who are saying, oh, you know, the access storage building is so high at 5 stories. This is just huge. And, you know, I'm sure we can go through again a criticism of Mike Spence's methodology, but you only have to have a look at your own rendered images to show. And this was when Dr. Millet was, we were discussing with Dr. Millet, the Coty building. You can see how huge that development is. And I think there's absolutely no question about the bulk and height of the development on the Tesco site and it being totally out of character with the area.
Okay.
Sorry, ma'am.
So,
Do you mind if I just stand up for those who might not have the document? This is the view that we're referring to.
yeah, I've got it on screen. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So you're in danger, I think, Mr. I fully understand that how important it is to you and the concerns you're raising, but you're raising the same points just from different views.
Yes.
So you've got your message, you've got across what you want to say. I'm not sure how beneficial it is to just then repeat the same points just from different views when we've got all the photographs and the evidence before us.
Okay. I wanted to have a look at two viewpoints, the next two briefly. So this is viewpoint 12 and 13, just so that we can have a look at it. But yes, we'll be making the same point. So 12 is from Rothbury Gardens on the Northumberland estate, which shows how huge it is. And I know we were referring previously, I think, to the view that you mentioned from, it was along Northumberland Avenue, which again is slightly higher up. And that was, I think, where you saw, hold on. So if we're looking at 10.51, is it 10.51? I think I'm going to be waking up in the night remembering these reference numbers. 10.51, page 6, AVRB, home base application view 2.
So Mr. Warren just took us
Yeah,
to,
that's
yes.
right. So that's taken from Northumberland Avenue, which is a good few meters higher than Rothbury Gardens. Rothbury Gardens is at the bottom, parallel to the railway line, which is our view, view 12. And that shows how huge the building is. I know on page 6 here of 10.51, you can see the stepping back from the sort of the cruise liner corner there. But when you're on Rothbury Gardens, you see the blocks at the southern edge of the development close to the railway line. And that's what we're showing in our Viewpoint 12. And then the only other one I wanted to mention was Viewpoint 13, which is taken from the junction of Wood Lane and the Great West Road by the Osterley Park Hotel, where you can see the height of the current Homebase tower there, and then how tall these buildings would be. So all of these visuals, these visualizations are just reinforcing the bulk and height of the building, and that there's absolutely no question about it.
Thank you.
I'll give you a reference, ma'am. Sorry. If you're interested at any point to look at the comparison, the AVR critique showing inaccuracies in that view is ID 1.17.3, 1.17.3, internal page 42, PDF page 44. So that's that MSE view 12. Leaving aside matters of using pink block rather than rendered and so on.
Can you give us that reference again,
Of
please?
course, it's 1.17.3, ID 1.17.3, page, if you're in the PDF, page 44.
1.17.3.
Yeah, page 44 PDF page number. And it just shows AVR's work shows that Mr. Spencer's image is too high in the view, for instance, in the wrong place, etc.
Sorry, which page?
PDF page 44.
Page 44. Sorry, minor differences. Still confirms the bulk and height of the building.
Okay. The only other point that we would make, ma'am, very briefly, is this point that we were looking at and the one from further up are addressing the relationship between the site and the residential areas to the west. The other one that we looked at from the overbridge is a rather different point, it seems to us, because that's the point on the Great West Road, I mean, because that point is much more about the townscape of the Great West Road itself and all of the commercial buildings that one would see the scheme in the context of. I'm not giving evidence, I'm just identifying that that's a different kind of point from the one that we're looking at in relation to the residential areas.
No, I understand that, and I understand why Strike and her colleagues are making the points they do, because they're concerned about the residential. Yeah. Are we about done on Homebase bulk and height?
We are indeed.
So that seems to me a good time for a short break. If we break until, I think this morning, I think we'll maybe take just a number of shorter breaks as we go along. I don't want to disrupt the flow of the discussion too much. Actually, before we do that, roughly, have you got the same points to make in terms of the Tesco development?
We have indeed.
Okay, so do you want to just take us to particular photos then that you want to draw attention to? I'm not.
Do that now. After the break.
I'm just trying to. I do hear very much what you want to say, but I want to make the best use of inquiry time.
Of course.
And keen to avoid repetition. I appreciate the views are different, but is it largely going to be similar points?
Yes, but it won't. I mean, it's much shorter.
Okay,
on
maybe
Tesco.
we'll do that first then.
Okay.
So if you want to move, do we want to shut anybody? You're going to put your hand up to go to the toilet. We'll press on, and if anybody wants to go, just go and come back.
Right, so if I can refer to the officer's report for the Tesco site, CD 5.3. And paragraph 8.164. Yes, 8.164. So it says the proposed development is high density and includes a series of tall buildings defined in the Hounslow local plan as those over 6 stories or 20 metres tall, up to 17 stories. The proposed building heights would be a step change compared to the scale of existing developments on the site and its surrounding context. Consequently, there would be a high magnitude of change to the local townscape, and owing to the height of the buildings, they would be able to be seen from longer distances and so potentially impact on the setting of heritage assets in the surrounding area. So the point being made about the high density, the high magnitude of change to the local townscape, and the height of the buildings, that they'd be able to be seen from longer distances. So I just wanted to emphasize that point before we move on to the Housing Design Review Panel report for the Tesco site. Right, if I can find that one in my pile of papers. Right, so for the, so this is CD 4.11. This is the Hounslow Design Review Panel report from January 21. CD 4.11, and I'm on page 1. Are you there, ma'am?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, right, sorry.
Just reading it.
Right. We still, so on the first page there, the 4th sentence, however, we still feel that the overall amount of residential accommodation is too great for the site and will affect the ability of the development to achieve its placemaking objectives. We would like further reassurance that all submission documents are explicit about site constraints and are robust enough to protect nearby heritage assets. So, you know, we'd be wondering how the harms to the character and appearance of the area could be mitigated. So not only in the immediate vicinity, but also the longer views from Ostley Sign and Kew for such a larger development. And I know we've looked at some of that in the heritage evidence in the last few days. So it's this question from the panel. We would like further reassurance that all submission documents are explicit about the site constraints.
Okay. How's that
We
been
were
taken
just
on board?
looking, ma'am, you've got to have you open that document. It's, I think you need to read the document and see the context for that particular comment. I mean, if you'd like a short contribution from Mr. Fenn on the substance of that, by all means, we can.
I think that might be
do that.
helpful. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Fenn.
Thank you. Well, all the constraints were clearly set out in the design and access statement and have been undertaken and gone through clearly in Mr. Adams' proof previously. Certainly, yeah, we disagree with the comments about the DRP made in terms of the amount of residential accommodation on the site. We simply disagree with that point, and you'll see that the sentence above that about the fact that they've commended us on the number of changes that we have incorporated, ma'am, as part of the raft of changes resulting in consultation on the site, which again, Mr. Adams has clearly set out in his proof of evidence on page 88, I believe.
And I'll just say this the once, ma'am, so that I don't have to keep coming back to it. The key paragraph in the report, officer's report, you were taken, I think, to 8.164. the key judgmental paragraph by the officers bearing all of this in mind, including what the DRP said, what the locals said, what JTP said, is 8.170, 8.170, which is PDF page 71. I don't ask you to go there, man, but that's where these points about too much residential, has it been properly explained, is there enough transition and scale and character, are judged to be acceptable, indeed judged to be beneficial by the officers.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Sorry,
You did introduce him at the start, but I didn't get the name then either.
Ian Fenn from
How am I-
from JTP, colleague of Mr. Adams. Thank you.
From where, sorry?
JTP Architects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know whether anyone from our team wants to add anything. I just maybe one comment. Maybe I should withdraw what I said about ignoring the DRP comments and recommendations and change that to the fact that you disagree with them.
I think that's probably a fairer way of putting it.
Yeah. Okay, if I can move on to another comment then in the DRP, and this is on page 2 under the heading of protecting heritage.
Sorry, say that again.
So yes, so I'm on CD 4.11 again. So the Tesco, the HDRP review of the Tesco site on page 2 under protecting heritage, which is the bottom bit of that page. So the second paragraph, there is concern about the unremitting nature of development characterized by ranks of buildings with sizable footprints and its impact on the wider townscape. The fly-through animation, and we'll come back to the fly-through animation when we talk about the 3D model. The fly-through animation indicates that there isn't a balanced relationship between ground, built form and sky, which is necessary to prevent the development feeling overbearing to the human scale. Although we're supportive of how the design distinguishes between taller elements with lower linking blocks, we note that these blocks are themselves still high and feel that there is still too much development for this strategy to be successful. So again, how has that been taken into account?
Thank you. Thanks, Mum. I suppose a number of points to be made here. We set out quite clearly in the design and access statement the number of different typologies of buildings used throughout the site, both in terms of height of those buildings and the articulation of buildings at ground floor level and at roofscape too. Number of different typologies and how they're treated in terms of height, materiality, etc. We've also set out quite clearly in the design and access statement the series of public open spaces that the scheme provides and the legibility between these as well, and that allow for the views both into and out of the scheme. So we feel actually we are addressing the amount of space and the human scale of the visitor and the viewer as you walk around the scheme.
And the response to the DRP comments, which I think was part of the question there, wasn't it? And whether the scheme has dealt, as it were, with the points that are raised. See Officers' Report to Committee 8.185 to 8.186, which
Sorry,
is on
say again.
8.185 to 8.186, page 74 of the committee report, which is CD 5.3. Page 74 of CD 5.3.
Yes, if I can just, and I've got one more point to make from the DRP. The comments of the DRP, why are we using them? Why are we relying on them? It's because they reflect our views. Now, we're residents, we're not architects, we're not designers, but this was our gut feeling about what we were seeing. But here we're getting comments from people who have been working in the field for many decades, who really know what they're talking about. They've got the experience, the breadth of experience, the depth of experience, and it reflects our view. So it's not just the DRP, it's our view. And I think, the officers responded to the views of the DRP, didn't really respond to our views, which were listed on many, many pages of the officers' report. But this is why we're relying on the DRP, because it does reflect our views.
I understand that.
So if I can move to the conclusion, please, at the bottom of page 3 of this document, CD 4.11. So it says in the conclusion, in summary, the panel has fundamental concerns about the scheme and feels that many of the issues highlighted in the first review are still to be fully addressed. And then further down in that next sentence, we advise that you take a step back and reconsider the overall quantum of development. Both you and Hounslow should be aiming to have the highest aspirations for this very important site in terms of quality and accommodation, public realm, sustainability and relationship to heritage. And we do not think the scheme delivers these in its current form. And I think that's a very strong conclusion from the DRP, that we don't think that it doesn't appear to have been taken into account. Or will we hear again that you disagree with that statement?
Okay, thank you. But that's you're saying that you agree with the design review panel views there.
Absolutely.
And obviously wholeheartedly agree with their conclusions. I understand that.
And what are the views of the...
They'll be the same as before.
Okay,
I'm
same as
sure.
before, they disagree. Yeah, ditto. Right, if I can then, I don't know if anybody else has got any comments before we just move on to some of the visuals. Sorry, if you have a look at the ID 1.14.17, which are the photographs of our 3D model. (1.14.17). And then maybe after the break, we can, after we've done density, we can come back to the 3D model. So the bottom two photographs where you can see the Tesco development, bottom left, junction of McFarlane Lane and Scion Lane. You can see how high these buildings are compared to the two-storey houses on Scion Lane. And I think particularly the two-storey houses on Oaklands Avenue, where they really are towered over. And when you consider that the Tesco site is southeast of Oaklands Avenue, and obviously there will be effects of overshadowing, which we have discussed in a previous roundtable. And then on the right-hand side, where again you can see this is Scion Lane southbound going towards to Gillette Corner, where you can see how huge the buildings on the Tesco site are compared to the small two-storey houses then going along Scion Lane from McFarlane Lane down to Gillette Corner.
Okay. And these are all views from quite an elevated position, as opposed to a street view.
Yes, these are taken from slightly higher up in the model. And sorry, if I could just say the differences in colours, where you've got blue here and we've got grey on the model. It's just when we had the model made, we were in such a rush, and that the Tesco and the Homebase site hadn't been coloured, and so the colour was added in later in the photographs, which is why you've got grey here and you've got blue here.
Okay.
But yes, I mean the point is that again you can see how high and overpowering and out of character the sizes of these buildings are compared to the surrounding area.
thank you. So
And-
again, that's the same points as you made in
Yes,
relation
exactly.
to the home base.
And then I would just go to two of the viewpoints from Mike Spence's visuals in ID 1.14.14, and that's viewpoint 14 and 15 from the Grasshoppers car park and from Goals.
Yeah. 14 and 15.
14 and 15, yes. So again, which show how high, the bulk and height of the buildings. We keep coming back to that. And I was thinking particularly from Goals, where you can't even see the top of the buildings because it is so high.
Okay. Mr. Warren, do you just want to take me to the corresponding views for your side in relation to Goals?
I can. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I wasn't ready to do that. We can do. You'll just need to give us a moment though to find it. Let me just track down. It's AVI, is it? Yeah, that's it. So it's in 10.51, ma'am. That one that you've got there.
10.51.
Hard copy, page 13.
Sorry, can you remind us, please?
Core document 10.51,
Oh, right, yes. And which page?
page 13.
Which is taken from much further away.
And with probably the camera 25 mil, 24 mil.
Yeah, it's a
And this
different
is
part
tr-
of the sports field, but it's
Yeah,
from
and this
the
is
sports
is
field.
a 24 mil photo, 24 mil lens.
I don't think we should get into lenses, given what we
Well, but
cross-examined
this
Mrs.
is why you
Spencer
get the difference between 50 and 24.
Well, the methodology is set out at the back of the document. But I think your question, ma'am, was that is there a kind of corresponding applicant's
Closest
image, and
got,
this is the
yeah.
corresponding one, yeah.
Okay.
So just to maybe finish off this session, I just repeat what we said in our proof of evidence, that the bulk and height of 16 blocks of flats of up to 17 stories on the two sites would be in stark negative contrast with the character of the surrounding area and would dwarf and dominate its suburban and historic surroundings of mainly two-story houses. And I think that Olga here has got just one other comment that she'd like to make.
So I would like to give you another reference. This reference again from Master Plan Capacity Study, so CD 10.39. It's on page 221, section 3.5, and it's on possible impact of tall buildings, and refers to the Gillette building. So at the bottom left-hand corner, what it says here in relation to the new developments. It is important that proposed nearby tall or large-scale development respect the setting of the listed building in terms of scale, articulation, detail, and materials, and does not dominate its surroundings or detract from its prominence. And the next sentence says, the Gillette Tower should remain the dominant landmark and the highest townscape element.
Okay, but that's more to do again with back to the heritage aspects of the Gillette
But
Tower.
it's also about height of new developments
But that's in relation
in
that's
relation to the
to the
heritage.
listed building. And
Yes.
I think we have covered that in quite some detail over the previous 3 days. This is the session we're on now is more about general character and appearance, not putting to one side. I know you can't really separate
Okay.
that, but yep.
I wasn't sure if you're aware of this
Okay.
reference.
I've got a note of the reference
Thank you.
anyway. Thank you. Is that a
Okay,
good time
thank
for a
you.
break now then?
Yep,
Okay,
thank
thank you
you.
very much. So 5 to 11, if we take a break until 15:15 then. Thank you. Were you looking to move on to density or deal with the model?
Yes, it's if we can have a look at the density first,
Okay.
ma'am. So I would refer you, ma'am, to our housing density comparison table, which is ID 1.14.20. So we couldn't find any reference to actual densities of homes on the two sites in the application documents. So we had to do the calculations for ourselves. And this Appendix F, this document, is a distillation of that. And I have to say, I knew nothing about housing densities before I started all of this and did a lot of research on it. Went through loads of planning of documents on the council website to look at areas, number of homes that had been approved, and generally there's a lack of information, so sometimes you have to make a guess on the size of an area. And I have to say, I'm surprised that this isn't given in planning applications, but you know, what do I know? There was a reference to a density figure of the Homebase site, but that was in the GLA Stage 1 report. And in the officer's report, it refers to very high density on this site. And in our proof of evidence for the Homebase site, and so the reference for our proof of evidence is ID 1.14.2. And this is really a commentary on what's in this table. So we say that the average density of 314 homes per hectare across the two sites is very high compared to 17 homes per hectare in Ostley and Springgrove Ward. It offers a poor quality of life for future residents and is higher than the numbers quoted in the local plan site allocations 2 and 11. And this makes for an extreme and unacceptable step change in comparison with most of the surrounding built environment. And we go on to say that the density of 338 homes per hectare on the Homebase site exceeds by far anything in the area. The development on the old Civic Centre site, which is just up the road from here, close to close to Hounslow Town Centre, is about half that at 178 homes per hectare. And for the proposals at Griffin Park, close to Brentford Town Centre, and the Hounslow Cavalry Barracks, which has a cluster of listed buildings. So their densities are less at 109 and 91 homes per hectare, respectively. And the highest blocks there are 6 to 9 stories, not 17. And if we look at the officer's report on the Homebase site, again, this is CD 5.2. And I'm referring again to what we stated earlier. This is paragraph 8.120. Policy D4 emphasizes the importance of appropriate design scrutiny. With the higher the density, the greater scrutiny, including from planning, design and conservation officers and design review. And in 8.297, it references the GLA, that the GLA has calculated the proposed density at 439 units per hectare, which is a very high density. Now, the difference between the 439 in the GLA document and our 338 homes per hectare on the Homebase site is that the GLA, yeah, so it says, sorry, yeah, read the whole thing. GLA officers estimate that the net residential density of the scheme is 439 units per hectare. This calculates the density based at 77% of the site area, reflecting the ratio of non-residential uses within the scheme. The proposals therefore trigger the requirement for a design review given the density and the height. So that's the reason for the disparity. But I couldn't do a comparison with all these other sites using that calculation because I didn't know what the ratio of non-residential uses was. So we've stuck to the taking the whole area, the total number of units, and that's where we've got this comparison. And in the officer's report, 8.1, paragraph 8.125, policy D9 from the London plan sets out how development proposals should address the visual, functional, environmental and cumulative impacts of tall buildings. The supporting text 15 to the policy says the Tesco Homebase refers to the policy, says that, quote, whilst high density does not need to imply high rise, tall buildings can form part of a plan-led approach to facilitating regeneration opportunities and managing future growth, contributing to new homes and economic growth, particularly in order to make optimal use of the capacity of sites which are well connected by public transport and have good access to services and amenities. However, they can also have detrimental visual, functional, and environmental impacts if in inappropriate locations and or of poor quality design. So I think our question here is, why is such a high density development proposed next to a suburban area of low-rise houses, away from a town centre with low PTAL and little parking?
Thank you, ma'am. So just a few points to follow up on that. Firstly, in terms of the density comparison table that OGRA has put forward, we'd note that it is a selection of examples they've put forward, which notably don't include a number of the schemes that are on our plan of the developments coming forward in the context, which I don't have the ID reference number, but it's the one that we've submitted yesterday to replace. That's ID 2.52, including the Citroen schemes and the Albany Riverside and the Capital Interchange Way schemes, which the important point is about the location in plan terms and the location within the opportunity area. In terms of the policy context, clearly the London plan and the approach within policy D3 is what's relevant here in terms of the approach to density and not being a kind of formulaic quantification. It's about a design-led approach to optimizing the sites, and you've heard previously in terms of from the architects in terms of their approach to optimizing and balancing all the considerations that go in to create. So it wasn't a numbers game; it was more of a design-led approach in line with D3.
Do you want to do locations?
Okay. Have you had a look at D3?
Sorry.
Well, sorry. I just want one more point while I'm.
Sorry, I thought you'd finished.
Just to finish, is about the quality of the design, really, in terms of that design-led approach and its location within the opportunity area. We understand the points about the additional scrutiny and the high quality of design, and that's in our professional view what has been delivered in terms of taking with the highest quality of design, and you've heard the evidence from the architects on that.
Can I just add finally, ma'am, I think the reference there also at the end was to PTAL and so on. I won't repeat, we had that debate obviously about PTAL, how it's calculated, multi-mode, bus to the station, all those points you've heard already.
We've heard a reference to high quality design. It's interesting that we tend to hear it only from the applicant's side. I don't think any resident has said to us that they thought it was high quality. Also in your document, you have many references to beauty and beautiful designs. The design review panel, I don't think ever used the expression high quality or beautiful, and we would actually dispute that. Obviously, that's a subjective view, but I don't think most of us would agree with that. So we keep hearing this reference to design-led approach to optimizing the sites. I think we would use the term of maximising the area on the sites. I looked at a lot more developments within Hounslow. I didn't look at ones that are coming forward because I didn't have the information on them. I was just looking at ones to which we did have access. You know, and again, I stress, you know, when you look at that table, the proposed Tesco site is just way, sorry, the proposed Homebase and Tesco sites, both of them, are just way above the density compared to these other ones there. And again, if you have a, you know, we're not asking for more parking because we know we're moving away from that. We're moving to public transport and clean streets. But you know, there's very little parking. So you know, the PTAL is low. There's little parking. So all of that combined with this high density just shows how inappropriate, together with the bulk and height, shows how inappropriate the development on the Homebase site, will come onto the Tesco site, is at the moment.
Okay, thank you. That's
okay. Do you want to add anything?
Thanks. Just to reiterate our stance on PTAL, we've exhausted this subject and it is contained in our proof of evidence, and we repeatedly made the point that we as residents have experienced this. Right now, trains are up to capacity, tubes are up to capacity, buses are up to capacity. So we can't understand, unless there's something we're missing here, we can't understand the rationale behind that says that we're okay, despite the very high density that the applicant has decided to go for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so if we move on to the Tesco site then. So on the Tesco site, in our table there, you can see that the density is slightly lower than on the Homebase site. So it's 308 homes per hectare. But it's still above 300 and much higher than recent developments in Hounslow. I think our view is that, yeah, high density means people live in very close proximity to each other. So design, maximizing space is essential. The amenity space has been kept to a bare minimum, and the tower blocks so close together, as surely these reduce future residents' quality of life and have a harmful effect on the character and appearance of the area. And this is tied up with the density.
Okay. So it's not density per se, it's the effects of the density proposed.
I think both.
Okay. So density of itself isn't necessarily a harm. If something's high density, just because it's high density doesn't mean there's necessarily a harm. It's the effects of that high density that.
And it's the high density in this particular area, which I think, yes, yeah, sorry, I agree there.
Okay, thank you. Anything you need to add over and above what you've already said in relation to the Homebase site?
No, I mean, well, the only point is on density. Mr. Roberts mentioned some of the other schemes which have been granted permission in Brentford in the opportunity area. Citron, for instance, is one where the dwellings per hectare figure is substantially higher than the Tesco scheme. So I'll track down, I was just looking for it, ma'am, when you came to us, a reference to that for you. It's quite important. I appreciate looking at the exercise and how difficult it is looking at existing areas and so on, but it's quite important to look at dwellings per hectare in these recent schemes that are coming forward under the opportunity area policy. And that's a recent example, the generality of which will be familiar to Strike.
Okay, so you're going to come back to us with the density for the Citron scheme?
Yes, a reference to it. I think it's 440. I'll come back to you with a reference to it.
And that's dwellings per hectare. Okay. Anything else on
Yes,
density?
Mrs. O'Reilly would like to respond to that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that the applicant is referring to developments in completely different areas, which are more industrial and commercial than Osterley and Spring Grove. This is a different context with respect, and I think more weight needs to be given to the density of the suburban residential areas on 3 sides of this development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You coming back with a figure? Still looking. Okay. Okay.
So
Anything else?
if I could make just one
Yeah.
more point here on the Tesco site. So on the Tesco site, we've got 308 homes per hectare. Diagonally opposite from the Tesco site, you've got the Wyke Estate, which was built in the 1980s. And I think one of the points we've made, and we will make again, is that what we'd like to see on the Tesco, as you know, we're not against development of these sites and regeneration of these sites, but what we'd like to see on the Tesco site is a 21st century equivalent of the Wyke Estate. Now, I know we're talking about this current planning application, but if we compare what's proposed on the Tesco site and on the Wyke Estate has got, it's an area of about 3.4 hectares. So it's more than half of the, yes, probably about 0.6 of the proposed Tesco site. And it's got 179 homes. It's got a mixture of townhouses, semi-detached houses, blocks of flats up to 3 stories. It's got plenty of parking spaces, but that's totally different. I realise that was built in the 1980s, but it's the contrast between the Wyke Estate there and the Tesco site, which are diagonally opposite each other. And I think that just shows how
And that's at a density of 53 homes per hectare.
That's, yes, that works out at about 53 homes per hectare. So a huge contrast.
Okay.
So I think that's it from us on density.
Okay, thank you very much. Point 3 on the agenda then, could any areas of concern be addressed by conditions or planning obligations? I suspect I know the answer to that, given the points that have been raised. Your objections go.
Our condition is 6 stories is our red line.
No. Okay.
Can I come back?
Yeah.
You have to assemble it, but you can see the way to do that. Core document 9.1, inspector's report, paragraphs 2.1 and 5.5. So there you have the number of units, 441, and the site size 0.96 of a hectare. So it was basically 440 units on a hectare.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else then in terms of character? Oh, you wanted to
we want to
mention
talk about the
model.
3D
Yes.
model.
Yeah.
Okay, if I can move on to that then. So 3D modelling is recommended by Historic England Advice Note 4 on tall buildings, which is ID 2.17. The London Plan Policy D4, Delivering Good Design, which is CD 6.2.27. And policy D9 on tall buildings, which is CD 6.2.32. And policy D9 says, quote, seek to utilize 3D virtual reality digital modeling to help identify these areas, assess tall building proposals, and aid public consultation and engagement. 3D virtual reality modeling can also help assess cumulative impacts of developments. So where was the applicant's 3D model?
The reference there is to 3D virtual modelling.
Whatever, virtual or virtual or physical, then we're interested in. And if I can refer back to when we were having consultations, we're going back now to the autumn, going back 3 years now, autumn 2019. And I remember when we were involved in choosing the architect for the Tesco site, when we had the meeting with JTP and the other architects, and we asked whether 3D models would be produced, because they actually came along with some 3D models that they produced for other developments, and they showed us these, and we said, well, would we get these? And we were told yes. And we kept asking for a 3D model. We kept asking for 3D models. I noted in Historic England's proof of evidence that they asked for the View City models 4 times and didn't get them. We asked for models, and it was eventually because we didn't get a model. And I remember we started asking, the planning application was due to be submitted in July 2020. And we were asking then, where's the 3D model? And that was when we were coming out of that first lockdown. And we were asking for the 3D model, and we kept getting sort of excuses from the developer. We didn't know when we were expecting the planning application to be submitted any day, and we thought, we need residents to be able to see what these developments look like, either in physical form or virtual form. And it was eventually, I think, when we got to the beginning of September, the planning application hadn't yet been submitted, and we thought, we can't wait any longer for this. We're going to have to commission our own 3D model. And at that point, we did look at virtual or physical models, and we decided to go with the physical model. And that's how that came about. Now, the developer then, I think, did then produce a model, a physical model and a virtual model, and we referred to the fly-through model, I think, in the Hounslow Design Review panel. So these appeared on the Scion Lane Future website for a short time, and then they disappeared, and we haven't seen them since. I think they were there sometime late in 2020, early 2021, and disappeared. So nobody's ever seen their 3D, the physical 3D model, for all sorts of reasons. But we did manage. I mean, we were given the excuses of lockdown and social distancing. We managed to exhibit our 3D model to local residents, sticking to the social distancing guidelines, and we took very careful advice, and we worked it very carefully so that no more than 4 people would get close to it at any one time. And we managed to exhibit our model 4 times. And people, when they see it, they say, oh, wow, this is how we see how it is, what it really looks like. And if I can say then, this model was, we paid for this out of our meager means. This is produced by a professional model maker based on OS maps. It is accurate and to scale. The only thing that we did change, and we probably still haven't got quite right, is the height of the Homebase clock tower. Sorry, the Gillette clock tower. But everything else is done to scale. The sizes of the vehicles and the buses are in proportion. So this has been very carefully done and checked. And we would love to see the developers' 3D model here by comparison.
Okay.
Do we need to add anything to that?
Question. You want to ask a question?
Why then?
So why didn't the applicant produce 3D model despite promises to do so?
Okay. Who's taking that?
I'll just start, ma'am, because I think with this point today anyway started from our comments about the model that we have in the room. So can I just deal with that first of all? The point I made earlier on, partly it seems accepted in relation to the Gillette building, is that we think that it's wrong. We can't see how it's been done. I mean, obviously, if there was a methodology which set out clearly, that might give us some comfort. But just, man, I repeat the suggestion that you just have a look at it yourself. And we're not suggesting that you shouldn't take it into account, but we're suggesting that you and the Secretary of State should approach it with caution, given that it's not verified or verifiable. And it seems to us to be wrong. So that's our it's really a repetition, forgive me, of what we said earlier on, and nothing I've heard from Ms. Stryack has changed our feelings about that.
Can I just, have you asked for any details to do with verification? of the
I'll
model?
check, ma'am. I'm not sure about that.
It's been around since the start of the planning application, from what I'm told. So it's not been questioned before now.
I don't think so, ma'am, in answer to your question. I will check behind the scenes, obviously, because I've only got some of my team immediately to hand, but ma'am, it doesn't appear so. And ma'am, that might be a fair point. I'm not as I say, I'm not asking you and the Secretary of State not to have regard to it. I'm just saying that one has to be cautious in the sense that it's not been verified, and it seems to us to be wrong. In relation to our own work, ma'am, very, very briefly, there isn't a requirement in any guidance to produce a physical model at the application stage or now on a called-in inquiry. Very extensive material is before you in terms of verified 3D modelling of the scheme, which you've seen. If it's a point about the process during the application, the fly-through, as you heard, was shown to the DRP. And the application to design access statement was accompanied by material, including all of the model views, upon which OGRA and other consultees had the opportunity to comment during the process of the application. So there's no valid criticism of in my submission, ma'am, to be made of the approach that the applicant's taken.
So you're saying that the AVR work,
that's the 3D model, as you
3D
observed.
modelling,
Absolutely.
it's virtual 3D modelling.
Absolutely, ma'am. And plainly, if we had been told that relevant consultees like the DRP or the GLA or Hounslow couldn't properly understand what the schemes would look like, and in the absence of a physical model, then obviously we'd have taken that on board. But
and what about a request for the View City?
The trouble with View City, ma'am, is that it's helpful, but when you're dealing in very general terms, but you have to be pretty careful about its accuracy when you're looking at things like very detailed modelling of moving. For instance, the point that we were looking at earlier in the week about when precisely the scheme might be visible adjacent to Sign House doesn't deal with trees. It doesn't deal with things that are actually critical in this particular case in terms of views from queue and so on. So we took the view that was actually not going to help anybody.
Yes, you mentioned that I think the council, the DRP, maybe didn't ask for a physical model. We asked for a physical model. As residents asked for a physical model, we were told, yes, there would be one and it was on its way. And you did produce one. Where is it?
I don't.
Was there a model?
I'll take instructions, ma'am, about whether there's one. I'm not. It hasn't. If there was
It's
one,
not
it hasn't.
in evidence.
It's not in
before
evidence,
us.
ma'am. No.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, can I just add a few words in
Yes.
addition to what Ms. Stryack has said? This model has been in existence for 2 years now for all to see. Everybody was sent an invite to come and inspect it. Within the residents, there are plenty of architects and engineers who would look at that and would say, at that scale, when you have houses at 6 millimeters high, it just illustrates the proportion. It's a block model. And the purpose of producing it is to illustrate the difference in bulk and height. And in that sense, it is indisputable. And we have invited the applicant, anybody else, to come and have a look at it. All you need is a scale rule, lift up this perspex cover with a scale rule, and you know exactly what we're talking about, because those models have been, the model of Tesco and Homebase have been based on architect drawings that were submitted at the planning application time. So we'll be delighted if anybody in this room, plenty of professional people and architects, get a scale rule and challenge it. We're open to challenge, because we're trying to illustrate differences rather than absolute numbers. This is point one. Point two, and by the way, I have looked at the virtual model, and as Ms. Triak explained, it was taken out. But when I looked at it, it was showing the sun setting in the wrong place. So the whole thing is questionable.
So which model are you talking about there?
Yeah, the virtual
virtual model that was on the Sign Lane Future website, possibly for a couple of months and then taken down.
There was plenty of inaccuracies, including where the sun is setting. It was taken at an angle that really avoid getting a feel for the bulk and mass of the development.
I haven't seen that, and it's so far as I'm aware, it's not in the evidence before me.
I mean, we would ask respectfully if the applicant wishes to show you that model, that would be a good thing.
But it's not in the evidence that's before me to date that people have had the opportunity to comment on.
Exactly, but if it was so good and accurate, it should have been, I would respectfully suggest it should have been in the evidence. That is in our evidence.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If I can just add, so I can't remember when it was, but we did get an email from the applicant's side after the first bit of the inquiry asking us about our 3D model, and I responded with information to that. There was never any follow-up back from the
What information
applicant.
was requested?
It was just some information about where the model came from, and I think I gave the information that I've given today. So that information, so we answered the question, and then there was no further follow-up to that.
Can I add one more thing, ma'am? I have looked very carefully at the wind report, and a physical model has been produced, which you need to do that to put it in the wind tunnel test and get results. So a physical model did exist, and it's contained in the applicant's wind report, and it demonstrates very, very clearly the difference in bulk, height, size with the adjacent buildings, because you can't look at the wind without looking at the adjacent buildings. So we know that a model of some kind has been produced, but it was not released. But we could refer you, if you wish, to the photographs of the model within the wind tunnel report that illustrate that the difference. And it can't be argued, because with wind tunnel testing, the models have got to be very, very accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think the point about that, ma'am, is that, that's correct, absolutely correct, but that's not a contextual model showing the buildings in relation to the surrounding streets. It's a technical piece of work aimed at showing what the wind movements, microclimate would be around the scheme. So I think we're at cross purposes here. It's not about the procedural requirement to produce information. The key thing here, ma'am, as you know, is how the buildings will appear. Now, I know we're near Heathrow, but looking down at a model at that scale from above is of little assistance, you'll appreciate, to judging what its effect would actually be in character and appearance, and indeed in any other way, frankly. And that's the problem with models like that as assistants to making planning judgments and design judgments. That's why both OGRA and the applicant have gone to the trouble and expense of commissioning views, photographs. I won't go back over Mr. Spencer's efforts, but we've both recognised that that's the way that one tries to establish and assist decision makers in terms of what they look in context. So actually, there isn't really any difference between how the two parties have approached that. And you've got all that material before you and the Secretary of State to assist your judgment.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I comment on that, ma'am, if I may? Thank you, Mr. Warren, for your comment. I would just repeat what I've said, that with wind tunnel testing, you can't put it in the wind tunnel tested as a model of a building. You have to model the adjacent buildings, and they have to be done to scale. And that photograph exists in the wind tunnel. That's point one. Point two, with all the visualization and 3D and all that, it's true to say, and I would invite the architects here, despite all this, 3D modeling, physical modeling like this are still being used today as we speak, and will continue to be used by very eminent architects in the UK and abroad. So these cannot just be dismissed.
I don't
Thank
think
you.
anybody is dismissing it, Mr. Zikri.
Thank you.
Is there anything else on character and appearance? Did you want to say anything, just summing up?
I think I would like to sum up that we continue to feel very strongly that these developments are out of character with the area. The 3D model shows this clearly. And so, yeah, if I can say, a number of architects have seen this model and complimented us on the model and asked about it. And have been very impressed with it. And I think, this shows what we would be facing in the area. And we're not against development, but this is not appropriate for our area. Don't know if anybody else wants to add anything? Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So that's it for today. Takes us then to tomorrow, when we've got closings. So I just want to double check timings, excuse me, if I may, for tomorrow. I think, Ms. Striak, you said about 1.25 hours for you.
That's correct.
English Heritage, do you know how long Mr. Linus is likely to be?
We can double check. I think he was probably looking to, I think he gave an estimate for closings previously, and I'm not aware that he's changed his position on that since.
I've got a note of about an hour.
Yeah, that sounds right to me, Mum.
Okay. For the council, an hour and a half?
Madam, an hour and a half top.
Yep. And Mr. Warren?
I won't be much longer than that. If around an hour and a half, I'd say.
Yeah, I've got 1.5. Okay, so those timings still stand. So we'll start at 9 o'clock then tomorrow. Then probably what I'll do is take just a short break in between each of the closings. And yeah, we will be going after lunch on these timings anyway, but I won't necessarily take a long lunch break. I'll just take shorter breaks in between each of the closings, if that's okay. Bearing in mind people need to travel.
And so, just on that point, I was going to say, if there was a possibility of mine coming immediately after the councils, I was going to say, could we have a short break? Because, as you know, my practice is to make sure that I pick up any points of response in the written thing rather than adding them orally.
I'll do it.
So I need a few minutes.
We can sort out however long they are when we're actually
Thank you very
going
much,
through the
ma'am.
day tomorrow. So anything else before I adjourn? I feel like an auctioneer looking around.
Sorry, I think Mr. Zikri has just a couple of questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Ma'am, just a few days ago, the council produced a note, a 2-page note about policy support for tall buildings at the appeal site.
That was yes, because I'd asked for that when we last met back in April. Yes.
The only comment we'd make here that ma'am, you'll be aware that the both reviews for the two sites are currently have not yet been approved. So they are in a form.
Is this the site allocations? Are you talking about?
Yeah, site allocation. That includes height and everything else. They've not been approved. So they cannot, and we don't know whether they're going to be approved in full, in part, or not at all. So I'm just making.
Yep, they're emerging plans, and we've had evidence as the
Thank
weight
you very much.
that might be attributed to them. Yes, thank you.
Can I raise 2 issues, if I may? And I'm sorry I wasn't able to come to the planning obligation yesterday, but on planning obligations, we are aware that electricity or capacity for the whole of West London is really, really very critical. And
So
in this
capacity in relation to?
electrical supplies.
Okay.
Electrical supplies. And we were just wondering, obviously these were statements that have been in the public domain and in the media, and they ought to be considered for inclusion in the planning obligations in the same way as capacities had a bearing on the timing of the development, the phasing of the development, and so on. So that's the first point. The second point, ma'am, if I may, is to do with traffic modeling, that during the roundtable discussion, the council have accepted that the area which is Northumberland Avenue, which is very critical to the functioning of the Gillette junction, has not been modeled. They simply either did not have time or whatever. It's not been modeled. And we would respectfully ask you to consider including the modeling of the Northumberland Avenue area and the solution for the traffic in Northumberland Avenue, which is very critical.
So it's traffic modelling you're talking,
Yeah,
right?
it's
that's
traffic
okay.
model. Yeah, to be included as part of the planning obligation, please. Thank
Okay,
you.
so in the planning obligations, I think there is a requirement to look at traffic on, if I'm right, I've remembered the name, on Northumberland Avenue, to look at when the development is if it went ahead,
Yeah.
is if there's any increase in traffic, that will all be monitored, and traffic calming measures would be put in place if they're necessitated.
Yeah.
By that, that's included in the planning obligation.
Okay, if you're satisfied, then
Well, I just
that's
tell,
fine.
I'm not here to give you my views about anything at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's included in the planning obligation.
Yeah, but the point I'm making, it need to be looked at and treated in the same rigor as the rest of the traffic. The rest of traffic has been modeled. Whether we agree or disagree with that is another issue. But all I'm saying is that that has not been modeled.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
solutions
recognised
have
by
not
the
been
inclusion in the planning
found.
obligation.
Yeah.
Of that.
Okay,
of that
so
measure.
these are the 2 points: electricity supplies and traffic. Thank you very
Then
much.
on the electricity, there's a, I think it's in the planning obligation as part of the energy statement to connect it, to make it ready for connection to a district that's a heating supply. I don't know if there's anybody else wants to say anything about the
Yes,
electricity.
that part of it is included, but we're talking about electrical
Electricity.
supplies as opposed to district heating. And that might, if Southern Electricity, the authority for this area anyhow, says that we don't have the capacity or we won't have the capacity immediately, that might have an impact on the phasing. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Warren?
There is an agreement between the electricity supplier and the applicant in relation to electricity supply for the Homebase scheme, which is obviously the first phase because Tesco has to move there. It's absolutely right to say these things are dealt with on a phased basis, and so obviously the expectation is as and when it's the appropriate time, a similar agreement will be in place for the Tesco scheme, but it's not necessary at the moment. It's certainly not common or indeed necessary in this case to include any obligations in the 106 relating to that. That's why it's not been done. But ma'am, it hasn't been raised before, but that's the factual position.
So that's an arrangement between the supplier and the
Exactly.
applicant.
Yes, absolutely.
With the planning process.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else? In which case, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll adjourn until 9 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you.